All right, so let's start in the back. We'll start with Ava. We're going to start with the election of 1800. Problems for both sides of the election. Of course, this is Jefferson and Adams. So tell us what you have, Ava.
Okay, so I said the Federalists had a lot of enemies from passing the Alien and Sedition Acts, and they had been really damaged by Adams not declaring the war against France. And then John Adams became known as the father of the Navy because he created a really big army and he wasn't using it. And the Federalists attacked Thomas Jefferson, saying that he robbed a widow and then had children with her, and was also atheist.
Yes, and of course, one of the big things that's another note is your next note, which is Sally Hemings. Who is Sally Hemings?
Jefferson.
Hold on. Go ahead. In order. Go ahead, Ayan.
She was a slave, Thomas Jefferson.
Just pardon this interruption. Junior, last name P through C. Please report to the chief. Junior, last name P through C. Please report to the gentleman.
Okay. All right. Shh. Recording. Okay. Yeah, a slave. Obviously, that she did have a lot of illegitimate children with Thomas Jefferson, and it becomes the election of 1800 really becomes the first sort of like mudslinging campaign where they start just throwing stuff at each other, their personal issues, things like that. We're going to get into more mudslinging, especially when we get into Jackson and stuff like that. But mudslinging kind of starts in this election. Okay. Kubabe, help me with the next one. Revolution of 1800. Why and why not? Not sorry, Kubabe. I'm sorry. Huzaifa. Why did I say Kubabe? Okay.
So bad. It's like
I said Jefferson won by 73 electoral votes.
A little louder. Turn your volume up.
Jefferson won by 73 electoral votes. Jefferson and Burr had the same number of electoral votes, so the House of Representatives had to break it. And it was a revolution compared to the 1776 election. And why? It was because the party switch, and it was the end of the Federalist Party.
Well, Revolution of 1800, it's not the end of the Federalist Party. Really, that's going to be after the Hartford Convention. But what we will see is that it's a revolution in the fact that it's a spirit of revolution. But what this is the key part to know is it's a peaceful transition of power. That's the thing to make sure you know. Okay, Jefferson's going to hold on to a lot of his Democrat Republican ideas, but unfortunately, because of his predecessor Adams, he's going to have to keep those Federalist ideas. Okay. So they're not quite dead, especially the ideas. We'll talk about what really kills them a little bit later. There's a quote that you probably want to write down too. This is a quote that Jefferson gives in his inaugural address, which happened March 4th, 1801. And he focuses on bipartisanship, avoiding foreign wars. He focuses on the rights of all the people, the minority. And the quote is that he says in his inaugural address, "We are all Republicans. We are all Federalists." Okay. Some of you guys may have that note. Okay. Grace?
kind of like added that sense of unification that we're all one the same despite our political background. He was trying to like undo some of the damage with like what Washington said, like, okay, I'm gonna try and fix this.
Yes, very good. Sabrina, go ahead and tell me about the two Jeffersons.
Okay, the two Jeffersons were scholarly private citizens, and they harassed public figures.
Well, it's Thomas Jefferson. One of them is sort of him as a private citizen. He's a philosopher. He has certain ideas he wants to get across. But who's the other Jefferson?
I put that he harassed public figures.
Well, there's another part we want. Anna?
He was harassed as a political.
Yeah, he was harassed, and I think we sort of have a conflict where he wants to get all these things accomplished, and all these great ideas, but then it's the conflicts that he experiences, the harassment he gets, that sort of make him be a realist as a president. Okay, and again, he is going to want to implement all these Democrat Republican ideas. Again, he has the idea that America should be agrarian, should be agricultural based. His opponents wanted to be an industrial based economy, and so we just sort of have this juxtaposition of ideas. That's kind of where we have the realist, who's the president and has to do his job and deal with conflict, and then we have sort of Jefferson, the philosopher, who still tries to get his philosophies ingrained in the U.S. government. Okay, Judiciary Act 1801. Tell me about that one, Anna.
also known as the deathbed, passed by Federalist Congress, and it created 16 new federal judgeships and other judicial offices.
Okay. And what's important too is who signs this right before they leave.
Oh,
John Adams. John Adams signs it. It's kind of like his last hurrah before he quits. And of course, these judges will be put in place for life. This is going to give the Federalists more power in a lot of the courts. Okay. Midnight judges. Tell me about those, Shari.
Adams spent his last days signing their commissions. They were last minute actions. Adams was taking, I guess we put it like the next one.
Yeah, very good. The 16 new judges that are appointed kind of the last second. Okay. John Marshall. Okay, Ari, you got that one? Tell me about John Marshall.
I said John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, appointed by John Adams as, yeah, and he was appointed at the end of Adams' term, so I'm pretty sure he was on the ninth judge, appointed during that time. And then I said he dominated the court, shaping, he dominated the court and really shaped American legal tradition. He also held Federalist views in the court during the Jeffersonian time, so he helped secure a lot of the power to the central government.
Excellent.
And then I said he served for 34 years.
Excellent. Everything I would have said. Awesome job. Okay. Marbury versus Madison. And this is a video that you should watch if you didn't get a chance to watch it. Okay. Did you want to do this one, Sabrina? Go ahead.
Okay, so Marbury was Secretary of State, but James Madison appointed him to be on the Supreme Court. But his commission didn't get sent through, and then they had a big fight about it. And this established judicial review, and it established that in this court case, it was like an appellate court because it wasn't like about foreign seas or something like that. Because I watched the video. And it was
Yeah.
talking about that.
Yeah, I thought the video was very good. Essentially, like you have a group of Federalists, and of course, the midnight judges are all going to be Federalist. And one of the judges who got signed off by Adams to be a judge was Marbury, and it was signed off, but it wasn't delivered so that he could take office in March. And so when Jefferson comes into play, he says, no, 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 it wasn't delivered, therefore it doesn't count, which causes this court case. And essentially, as you said, the big thing is that judicial review is established because of Marbury versus
And then
Adams.
Chief Justice played TJ and was like,
Yeah, it's a little petty. Yeah, a little petty. But the big thing again is again this conflict of the two powers, the two ideas, and what initially seems like a loss for the Federalists because Marbury doesn't get this appointment is really just allowing the Supreme Court to have this judicial review power. And as we said about John Marshall, he's going to be in play for 34 years. So it's not like the Federalists go away. Federalist Party will go away, but not the Federalist influence. Okay, very good. Okay, Samuel Chase. Liam, what do you have for that?
He was impeached but never removed from office.
Right, and who was he? What position did he hold? Supreme Court Justice. Okay, so again, this is going to start like the process of impeachment, really the first major political person to be impeached, but he doesn't get removed from office, and that kind of is important, and it was just a tactic to try to get the power to change, and it was ineffective, and so after this, we don't get any Supreme Court justices who were accused of a crime. They're not impeached. Okay, very good. Barbary pirates. Shari, what do you have for that one?
I have made industry of blackmailing and plundering merchant ships. Jefferson made treaty with in 1805.
Yeah, they were raiding the ships, and previously the presidents were essentially just paying them off, paying them tribute to leave us alone. And Jefferson says no, he's blackmailed, and essentially he signs a treaty with them in 1805 to end this issue. And it becomes sort of a foreign policy success for Thomas Jefferson. Yes.
I found it interesting. It was like a series of pirate states that were kind of aligned together, and that even though I'm wondering what nationality they technically were, even though yes, they were pirate states.
Well, I mean, they're all North African, so they're going to be mostly Islamic of ethnicity. As far as their country of origin, I don't know. They're pirates, so they are going to have ties to the government. But yeah, Northern Africa. Yeah.
That sounds really interesting. Just to read about it, or looking to get documentaries and or movies about it.
You should do that.
How
That
do
should
you
be your.
become a pirate? What makes you a pirate?
Have no respect for laws and government and just go out and start stealing stuff. Sabrina, after school today, just stop cars randomly and rob them. Okay, and you'll be a land pirate. Okay. All right, next one, Toussaint L'Ouverture. I know that's not the right way to say that, but that's what I'm going to say. Okay,
For that one, is that a person or?
it's a person. Yes.
Okay,
Okay.
so
It's a
I
person.
heard that they led infuriated ex-slaves of Napoleon, um, and they put up a stubborn resistance, which was ultimately broken. And I felt like it was a good representation of one of the factors that led Napoleon to like sell the Louisiana territory.
Yeah, because they're dealing with this massive slave revolt in Haiti, and so it kind of takes away the focus of Napoleon. He had this idea of establishing New France with the Louisiana Territory, and now he's just got one more thing on his plate. He's already tried to invade Russia. That hasn't worked out. He's dealing with all these other nations. He's stretched out. He says, "Okay, I need money for the war, so here, let me just sell this Louisiana Territory." And I think that's really interesting in what he wanted to sell it for initially and what he wanted to sell versus what we got. Okay. Did you have a question? You want to do the next one,
I
Anna?
have a question. Did Napoleon invade Russia during the winter?
Yes.
Why?
I don't know.
It
And
sounds like the stupidest idea.
it is a dumb idea, but people in power tend to think they're unstoppable. Hitler does the same thing in
Yeah,
World War
that's
II.
what I was like,
Yeah.
who has the
Yeah.
idea to invade
I
Russia?
mean, these guys are used to fighting in these conditions, and you think you're far away from your supply lines, and you think that because you have to plan ahead. You can't just invade in June because by the time you get into Russia and get into the cities, it's going to be winter. And I'm not a weather expert or geography expert, but I would assume it's pretty cold in Russia most of the year. Okay. So there's like a small window where you should invade. You should start marching in the wintertime, and by the time you get there, you can actually invade. Yeah. So at any rate, yeah. So this is Toussaint up on the screen you see here. Okay. Louisiana Purchase. This is I find this so fascinating. Okay. Anna, tell me what you have.
One Jefferson claimed fame for his land in France, almost doubles the United States.
Almost doubles the United States. Know the date, 1803. And I think it's very interesting. What were the French prepared to? I'm sorry. What was America prepared to buy for $10 million? Just $10 million.
Wasn't it just?
Just New Orleans. They just were going to pay $10 million for New Orleans, and then Napoleon says, "Hey, why don't you do me a favor? For $5 more million, you can have all of Louisiana Purchase," which is a sweet deal. Ends up being something like 3 cents an acre. Okay.
What did they want?
Why did who want it?
America.
America resources.
No, but when they sold the.
Why did the French sell it?
Yeah.
To pay for their efforts in Europe. Okay. They really were just overextended. They had this massive amount of territory. They wanted capital for the war effort. And so that's why they ended up selling it to America for $15 million. I don't know. Sometimes when you're in a bind, you're willing to make sweet deals to get things done quickly. Okay. Lewis and Clark. Oh, I'm sorry. This is something we have to know about this. There's a problem with Louisiana Purchase. Not with this awesome thing we purchased, but what is wrong about Jefferson allowing this to happen?
It doesn't say it anywhere in the Constitution.
Say it again.
It doesn't say it anywhere in the Constitution.
There's nothing in the Constitution regarding land acquisition. Okay. And remember, Jefferson's a Democrat Republican. He believes in a strict interpretation of the Constitution. And here he is doing something that's not in the Constitution. So he's kind of a hypocrite here. But I think most people let it slide because they're like, hey, I'm sorry, what? We paid how much for what? You get all of that for $15 million? We're going to let that slide. Okay. So, but it is important to know that he kind of breaks one of his principles.
Aren't there like houses now that sell for $15 million?
Oh yeah. In context, it'd be interesting to look how much in inflation that would be today. But unfortunately, inflation calculators only go back to like 1870 or something. They don't go back to this far. Okay. Very good. Lewis and Clark, 1804. Tell me about Lewis and Clark. Reagan. Didn't get that one. Huzaifa, not Kubabe.
They were set by Jefferson to explore the northern part of the Louisiana Purchase, sent to the Pacific coast. They went exploring for about 3 years and they document everything and bring things back.
Right, and who was the Native American who went with them? Sacagawea. Very good, Sacagawea. There was one video in the AP classroom that you're supposed to watch, and it's really the one that you really don't have to watch again if you didn't watch it. It was just about Louisiana Purchase and was about how there was correspondence between Meriwether Lewis and Thomas Jefferson and went back and forth, and the importance was that it sets up a precedent and it sort of foreshadows that we're going to have Indian treaties with these new Native Americans that we're now going to sort of have to govern and deal with. Okay.
He was like butt kissing TJ.
Oh yeah.
He was like, hey, like, come we can watch the show.
Yeah, come see my house. Check it out. Here, play my Xbox, whatever. But really, what it really foreshadows is we're going to kiss butt to get these Indian treaties done. But we know what's going to happen. We're going to break most of these treaties. Okay? Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, a whole host of other leaders are going to do the same thing. Yes.
Really do not know much about Martin Van Buren, but I know a lot about Andrew Jackson and just like
Wait, who's Martin? Oh,
Martin Van Buren is sort of who starts the Trail of Tears thing because of the Indian Removal Act was sort of proposed in his administration, but Andrew Jackson's the one where it actually happens in. So both those guys are really all for removing Native Americans from here. Okay, we'll get into the 1880s. We'll talk about the Indian Wars, where we just gained, like we're talking about 1803. We just gained this territory. We're trying to make these nice deals with them. In the 1860s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we're going to essentially eradicate them. And you know what's going to happen. Where are we going to put them?
in like
What do we call those big, huge chunks of land?
no.
Reservations. Okay, we'll get to that later, though. Okay. All right. Let's talk about Zebulon Pike. Zebulon Pike. Tell me about Zebulon, Grace.
Zebulon Pike was someone who explored the southern part of the Louisiana Purchase area. He spent a lot of time in Colorado, hence why Pikes Peak was named after him.
Very good. Just over the headwaters of Mississippi River. Very good.
Okay.
Aaron Burr conspiracies. This is a fun one to talk about. Okay. So, Sabrina, tell me about the Aaron Burr conspiracies.
Okay, so basically, Burr became like a really radical Federalist extremist. Who were like, and then they were like, and then Burr challenged Hamilton to a duel because Hamilton exposed him, and then that's it.
Okay, very good. Only one like in that whole explanation. Awesome job.
Progress.
Okay. You people at home watching this video, you should listen to Sabrina and count the likes that she gives for every answer.
No, don't
It's a
encourage
fun game.
her.
So you mentioned the secession issue, okay? And I was focusing on how many likes you said. Did you mention the fact that he wanted to sort of create his own country down here?
That he tried to succeed.
Well, he wanted this section of the United States to secede. He wanted New England and New York to secede. And then after that failed, he kind of traveled down to the now Louisiana Purchase and wanted to create a new country there. He was accused of treason, but the Supreme Court eventually decided just having a treasonous idea is not the same as having a treasonous act.
I
Okay,
mean, he tried to.
he thought about it. He might have attempted it, but he was going to let go.
He has powers. If he wanted to.
Yes.
It's not really a bad idea.
All right. Election of 1804. We got to move on, Grace. I know we want to talk about Aaron Burr and how terrible he is. We got to move on. Okay. Election of 1804. Jordan, what'd you write down for that one? Okay, say it a little louder. Okay. Jefferson's reelected easily. You might have written down the electoral votes 164 to 14. And at the time, France is fighting Britain. So we're kind of in the middle of this. And that leads us to who are we going to trade with? Who are we going to deal with? And how are they going to sort of deal with us trading with the other guy? And it leads to a lot of problems. Okay. All right. This is one of the major ones to know. This is one of the main causes for the War of 1812. Not this particular incident, but what was happening because of this incident. So the Chesapeake incident. Okay. Shari, what happened to the Chesapeake incident?
Okay. I have written a royal frigate overhauled the Chesapeake. Britain demanded surrender of 4 deserters, and then America refused, and Britain fired on the ship, and they went back.
Yeah, and you might have written down how many U.S. soldiers were killed. U.S. sailors, 3 were killed. But essentially, what they were doing, they stopped this ship, and the British were known for doing this. They were taking sailors off ships and forcing them to join the British Navy. What was that called? Impressment. Thank you. Okay, that's something you have to know because impressment is one of the major causes for the War of 1812. The Chesapeake incident is sort of a nice piece of specific evidence that says this is what happened, like what happened in the Chesapeake incident. So make sure you kind of tie those two together. Okay. Issues with France and England. Couple things here. Rowan, what do you have here?
On trade sank with both. France was taking or Britain was taking U.S. ships, and impressment was back in swing.
And what did, because of impressment, because we were sort of being harassed by the French and the British, what did America do? What was passed that actually was supposed to prevent issues, but actually cause more issues? What'd you say, Sabrina? The embargo. Okay, the Embargo Act of 1807. Okay, that's really important that you know that. The Embargo Act of 1807, in an effort to sort of keep us neutral and kind of keep us from being harassed. But obviously, it's going to backfire because it didn't hurt Britain. It didn't hurt France. Who did it hurt? Us. Hurt us. Okay. So here I want to mention something else, and it wasn't in your reading section, so I'm going to say it here. Oh, Macon's Bill number 2. Okay. Macon's Bill number 2. So just you might want to jot this down somewhere to give you an idea how to spell it. Okay. I just think this is very interesting. I was reading the AMSCO book and they mentioned this. It's not something I really talk about, but I think it's very interesting. After the embargo sort of backfires, we want to open up trade again with either France or Britain. And so essentially what Macon's bill is, we basically put it out there that if France will recognize our neutrality and stop messing with our ships, then we will promise not to trade with Britain. Or if Britain says, hey, we respect your neutrality and we want to impress your sailors, then we agree not to trade with France. It's almost like a first come, first serves. We kind of put it out there. Hey, who wants to trade with America? Do you want to trade? I'll tell you why you should. And it doesn't really work to stop, but eventually we do open up trade with the French more because even though.
At this time, South Ford, last name beginning A through H. Please report to the gym provision.
Okay. So even though the French are harassing us, they're not impressing sailors. So it's important to know that we're not really friends with either, but the British are the ones that are really making us the most upset. Okay. Where are we? Tecumseh and the Prophet. Okay. Tegan, can you tell me about Tecumseh and the Prophet?
Since Juana, the prophet, and Tecumseh were Shawnee brothers who organized the Confederacy of all tribes east of the Mississippi River and urged people to not give their land to white people unless there was a collective agreement.
Right. So they're from this confederation, which is going to conflict with the people on the frontier. The biggest thing to know: who are they? Why are they upsetting Americans? Why is that going to help lead to the War of 1812? What are the British doing? They're supporting these Native Americans. Okay, that's the problem, and that's really going to cause. And this was in the AP video as well. That's going to cause people on the frontier to be the people who most want to go with Britain, because the British are arming Native Americans to stop them. Okay, so that's another major reason for the War of 1812. Okay, okay. William Henry Harrison. Okay, Ava, what do you have for William Henry Harrison?
Oh, I said he's the one who advanced on, I don't really know how to say that.
Tecumseh.
Yeah, that. Headquarters and killed the prophet. He also burned the camp to the ground.
And he's the hero of what battle? Did you write that down?
Tiffany.
Tippecanoe. Very good. And he becomes a sort of a war hero because of this. And of course, we know what happens to him later. He becomes president. President. Yeah, he's not an awesome president, but he does become president. Okay. Battle of Tippecanoe. This is what makes Harrison a hero. He's going to burn down Shawnee settlements, and he's basically going to allow. He's going to force Native Americans to choose a side. They were already being supported by the British, but this just makes them more allied with the British. Okay. Reasons for War of 1812, and this is why I want to stop for a second. One of the things I shared with y'all on Canvas was a really nice part of the AMSCO chapter. This really talks about why the War of 1812 was important. But even more than that, if you remember when we talked about the American Revolution, you can get kind of bogged down in battles, but it's important that you just focus on what started the war, first battle, turning points, last battle affects the war. Okay, and so for our purposes here, we're looking at causes of the War of 1812, and I've already mentioned impressment. We've already mentioned that the British are aiding Native Americans to fight against the United States. One of the other reasons that you should have down is the war hawks in Congress are promoting war. They really want us to go to war. Okay, people like John C. Calhoun. He's a very important figure to know because he's going to be involved in all kinds of things that get America in trouble. Okay, he's from South Carolina, and I'm going to tell you that South Carolina is kind of a troublemaker when it comes to American history. Okay, and again, I mentioned this before. The British are harassing shipping. Also the French too, but obviously we are closely tied to the French because of Thomas Jefferson, and we support them in their aims, and they're not impressing our sailors like the British were. Okay, so Mr. Madison's War. Okay, Lily, what do you have for that one? And speak up because we are recording here.
big enough happening. And I steered the Americans towards it, wanted to restore the power of the Republic and fight off the Native American settlers and British settlements. They ended up focusing on the Great Lakes and other freshwater waterways.
Yeah, I think that's an important part. One of the big videos that you were supposed to watch is the War of 1812 itself. And you could get bogged down in a lot of the battles. There were so many battles that were involved in the War of 1812. But that video made it clear that more than half the battles were fought in the Great Lakes region. Okay, it was called Mr. Madison's War for a couple reasons, some of the which Lily mentioned, but one of the big ones is that it was highly contested. It wasn't like a unanimous decision to go to war. You had the New England industrialists who didn't want to go to war, and you had people on the frontier because of all their Native American issues who wanted to go to war. Okay, one of the things that you need to make sure you write down is that for Madison, it was important to prove that democracy could work. Okay, and that's sort of what we were trying to prove with the war. If we had an ideological reason for going to war, at least in Madison's eyes, it's going to be that we have to prove that this form of government, democracy, actually works. Okay, very good. All right, moving on. We had to read another part of a chapter. This is chapter 12. Oliver Hazard Perry. He was mentioned a few times in the video too with this Great Lakes battle. Okay, Dennison, what do you have for that one?
He was an American naval officer who built fleets of ships on Lake Erie and attempted to capture British ships.
Very good. And he had a very famous quote. Did you write down the quote? Anyone have the quote? Tegan? We have met the enemy and they are ours. Very good. Okay. All right, Francis Scott Key. Okay. Jordan, what do you have for Francis Scott Key?
That he was captured American and fell in British ship, but he also
Wrote the Star Spangled Banner. And what fort was being attacked as he wrote the Star Spangled Banner? That's another key thing to know. Who's got that? Fort McHenry. Very good. Fort McHenry. All right, burning of Washington, D.C. Okay, Liam, what do you have for that?
The British burned a lot of government buildings, including the White House.
Including the White House. And really, this was in a sort of retaliation for what? Did you read about that? What did we do when we were in Canada?
Didn't they bomb like the proclamation something? Then like they did.
We burned a very famous city in Canada. In what city? Toronto. Yeah, Toronto. It was called. I think it was called York at the time, but yes, Toronto. Okay, so we burn their city, and they come down and burn ours. Okay. And I thought this was interesting. The War of 1812 video made a good point at saying that this is the only time the White House has ever been attacked. And I think that's very interesting because now that video needs to be updated, okay, because of what happened January 6th. Okay. Not a fun part of history to talk about, but it's interesting that, up till that point, it had not been attacked in the way that it was on January 6th. But anyway, let's move on. Battle of New Orleans. This is one of the favorite things to talk about. Battle of New Orleans. Tell me about that one, Trey.
That was after the treaty had been signed, and they didn't know yet, so they were already fighting by that point. So
And who's the hero of the Battle of New Orleans?
it was that's his name.
Andrew Jackson. Yeah. Has anyone ever been to the battlefield in New Orleans? It's actually in a town called Chalmette. It's not actually in New Orleans. It's kind of interesting. They still have cannons that are painted there, and it's this big battlefield. On one side, they have the cemetery for all the people who died. And it's a really interesting part of New Orleans history because it was free people of color who were involved fighting for America. It was pirates. Okay, Jean Lafitte was one of the ones who was involved in helping to protect the city. They didn't want their city burned. They didn't want New Orleans burned like Washington, D.C. had been burned. And it does make Jackson a war hero. And even more so than that, it helps sort of solidify the pro-war people, the Democrat-Republican Party. And because of the last thing, the Hartford Convention, it kind of helps end any support for the Federalist and their idea of secession too. So it's really like a really strong sense of American nationalism that we kick their butt. Doesn't matter that the war was already over, but it's kind of the last taste of the War of 1812. Okay. Treaty of Ghent. Tell me about that one, Shari.
Treaty of Ghent. It was signed in 1814. It was signed so both sides would stop fighting and conquered territory was restored.
Very good. Who won the war?
It was American. Well, neither because
Neither. You got it as a stalemate. That was one of your questions on the other page, along with, what's the impact of the Louisiana Territory, doubling the size of America. But if you look up here on the screen, this is what I shared with you on Canvas. This is from Hamsco. I thought this is a great job of talking about the legacy of the War of 1812. So if you'll read with me, having survived two wars with Britain, the U.S. gained the respect of other nations. We do gain a sense of respect by other nations of power. The U.S. accepts Canada as part of the British Empire. Denounced for its talk of secession, the Federalist Party came to an end as a national force and declined even in New England. Okay, the Hartford Convention, which is your last note, talks about how these radical Federalists were talking about how to change the declaration of war and how they wanted financial assistance um, from Washington from the last trade. But really, the big thing is that this idea of secession makes them look traitorous, and now because of the Battle of New Orleans, the Federalist Party kind of dies out. But as we said, how does the Federalist Party live on? Say it again, Anna. Yeah, through John Marshall and the Supreme Court Federalist decisions that kind of shape American policy. Very good. Okay. So, talk of nullification and secession in New England set a precedent for something later used by the South. Abandoned by the British, American Indians are forced to surrender land to white settlement. With the British naval blockade limiting European goods, U.S. factories were built and Americans moved toward industrial self sufficiency. I think that's a great point. Just like the American Revolution, we're kind of cut off, so we kind of have to do it ourselves. A lot of women help in that regard. And here with the War of 1812, we sort of start to have the birth of American industry. When we do the Shark Tank activity, which will probably be not next week, but the week after that, you guys will give us sort of Shark Tank presentations on how the American economy is growing. Okay, we'll start talking about that tomorrow, actually. Okay, war heroes like Andrew Jackson, William Henry Harrison would soon be at the forefront of a new generation of political leaders. The feeling of nationalism grew stronger, as did a belief that the future for the United States lay in the West and escape from